in our overview of the Bible, we are in the book of Esther. And for me, personally, for X number of reasons, it's a difficult book to teach. Probably, sometimes it's difficult to talk about something when you do not know the thing, or sometimes it's difficult to talk because you know too much. And I kind of spent some time with the book of Esther, so it is somewhat hard. I'm basically not going to go over what you have in the handouts. That's for you to study at home. You need to, read it, think about that, and kind of ponder about, some things that I said or wrote. The important thing is, the only thing I will point out from here is the main themes. I marked 3 of them on the second page. Thing number 1 is a godly witness, and that's important to notice. We'll talk about that. Then there is a supremacy of the king. King, whatever he says or whatever he does, it cannot be changed. Sometimes, even if he decides to, under the influence of somebody else, he makes a decision which is kind of dangerous, not even wrong. It's more dangerous than wrong. He does not change his opinion. He gives another decree, and so on and so forth. That's how everything, resolves. And as you might know, the book of Esther is one book that does not have a mentioning or a name of God. God is totally absent from the book. And therefore, the third theme is very important, is how God works through people. That's one of the things which is important for us to read it. Why it is important for us to read the book of Esther. In some of the translations, if you open up chapter 6, it will say something like that God drove away the sleep from the king. Okay, there is no God, there is no Lord, there is nothing there. Okay, it is the phrase is somewhat weird in the structure. The sleep was driven away at this night. Okay. When sleep is driven away, it should be driven away by someone. But this someone is not mentioned. Okay? So that's a form that is kind of presupposes the presence, one of the things which it presupposes the presence of God. But there are other things where we can see his hand. So, now to the book. There is the regular way to read the book of Esther is, once upon a time in the faraway land, or recently we rewatched the very first episode of Star Wars, so in the galaxy far, far away, goodness knows where, nobody has a clue when it happened. Okay, there was a king, and the king was so cool that, so powerful, when he gathered together all of his 127 territories, when he grouped them into his empire, he decided to have a party. And he was such a wicked king that we can even see from the book, and we see that he was a wicked king because his party took half a year. So he and his buddies did nothing but drink and had an orgy all together for half a year. Okay, chapter 1. That's what it says. I mean, somewhat. Or that's the way you can read it. Okay, we'll come back to that. Then, at the very end of his orgy, he decided to bring his wife along down the road, and she was a godly wife. She did not want to participate in the orgy, so she said, "No way. I'm in my devotions, I'm reading portals of prayer, so I'm not going to come." And because she knew what will end up. She would probably ask to dance, naked on the table for all of his buddies, So, as a result, he got angry. He sent her to Siberia to shovel the snow, and he was looking for another wife. Then there was this wonderful guy, Mordecai, who somehow was able to get a very, like a rare chance he used for his, the word is not really clear. It's either his cousin or a niece, so some kind of relative, semi-distant. She was not his sister or, daughter or something. He raised her as a daughter. So he brought her into this competition of other women, and she won. So she became the queen. Okay? And that's how we know. Queen Esther. Then there was also another guy when you have a wicked king, not surprised that he's surrounded by wicked people. So there's another guy, real jerk, Haman, and he was a true anti-Semite. Right. He had nothing else but to dream about killing all the Jews. And when Mordecai did nothing wrong, he just suddenly was furious. And he came to the king, brought a bunch of lies on the Jews, and king, he's a wicked king, remember, right? You still remember, he's a wicked king. King agreed and said, yes, eliminate them. Let's kill all the Jews, okay? And that's what they planned. Somehow, Esther was able to convince the king that this is not a great idea. And king, he issues another decree, and Jews were able to defend themselves, and therefore they defended themselves and lived happily ever after. Done. End of story. Okay? That's the regular interpretation of regular interpretation of the book of Esther. In the middle of that interpretation, there is a dialogue between Esther and Mordecai, where Mordecai says, do you think you alone will be saved, and all of us will perish? Because if you will not step up, the help from God will come from somewhere else. So Mordecai presents himself as a very faithful God who trusts that God will provide some kind of miraculous help. Okay? And he has to approach, and basically not only approach but also reproach Esther and convince her that she needs to help poor Jews. Okay? And that's where she steps in, she convinces the king, and the rest of the story. Okay? That's a regular reading of the book of Esther. Wrong. From the very beginning to the very end. Okay? Now, let me show you from the Bible why it is wrong. Thing number one that we need to remember. The king, Ahasuerus, which is here, can be a name, but most likely it's a title. And it's a title that he is the king or ruler of rulers. Okay, kind of like almost Lord of Lords, or righteous king, something like that. He really reigned over a somewhat big, even considered in our modern sense, is a big empire. Bible does not tell us that it happened once upon a time in the faraway land. Bible clearly tells us that the kingdom that he reigned was from India to Ethiopia. Okay? Everybody knows their geography, right? It's a big deal. Okay? It's a territory compatible to current United States of America. Okay? It's not as big as Russia, but but those guys hold the biggest territory with the less population. But that's a different story. We're not going to go there. Important thing is, it's a vast territory. He just made peace over everything. And therefore, they decided to commemorate it with about a half year regular meetings, making sure that the peace still exists. So his knights or his princes were gathered up in the capital of Susa in Persia, and they would have some kind of regular parties and gatherings, and we can assume that they were wild, but we do not have to. And that's an important thing. When you read, you assume many things. And it's fine to assume as long as you understand what is in the text and what is your assumption. Okay? I believe that the parties were not wild for a few reasons. Reason number one, when you just established a peace over 127 territories and your kingdom is from India to Ethiopia, it's very easy to lose control, or especially on the edges, okay, of the empire. Therefore, you have to be ready to act on the instant, really fast. You need to be able to respond at the very same moment when you have the news that somebody rebelled again. Okay? If you have a half a year party, I don't know. I'm not really a big drinker, but I would assume that even if you have experience, somewhere down the road, about probably 3-4 months into the parties, you will not be able to respond as quickly as it should have been done. Okay? That's thing number one. Thing number two, that's an assumption too. So theoretically, as far as now, we work assumption against assumption. But in the Bible, what we have? We have the story that the king actually was so cool and so generous that he made a party not only for his princes, not only for the people who helped him to nobility, who helped him to gain that power, but also for all the citizens, okay, in the capital. For 7 days, they opened up the garden of the king's palace to everybody. Okay? And they prepared lots of festivities. I guess there were like some kind of tents, and people were allowed to come into the king's garden and, enjoy themselves. How do we know that they should have been enjoying themselves? Chapter 1, verse 8. The drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff in his place to do not as king desires, but as each man desires. So if you want to have red wine, fine, you can have a glass of red wine. If you want to have white Chardonnay, you can have white Chardonnay. If you want to go for the best stuff, which is, I believe, Guinness, okay, then you go for Guinness. But you do not have to drink yourself out to glorify the king. You want to have a glass? Fine, you have a glass. You want to have a little bit more? Fine. I'm pretty sure somebody got drunk. Because people are people, okay, let's put it this way. But the king's order is to create order, okay? Now, when you have many people, basically the whole capital showed up, what do you do at the very end? You want to see a ruler. Even now, from time to time, may she rest in peace, Elizabeth II would go to the balcony and wave a hand. And people would cheer. And it would be fine. And she would be accompanied by her spouse, which was Prince Philip. Similar story, I see similar story here. He comes at the very end of all of that, of the culmination, like a final moment, that celebration of peace. He goes and says, would you mind to bring, my wife? And she should have come and just stay with him. And they would say, king and queen, wave, and crowd would cheer, and everything would be fine. What happened is she disobeyed and humiliated the king. Okay? And that's why. Again, one more thing to say that the king is actually good. He, as a good king, has advisors. In chapter 1, he has 7 advisors. He is ready to listen for advice. He still makes his own decision, but he is listening to advice. And it's very important. In the Bible, it states a few times that the one who is ready to listen for advice is a good guy, is a wise guy. Okay? So he listens to advice because the advice was, Since she humiliated you publicly, everybody will know about that. And since fish begins to rot from the head, you need to deal with that. I don't think she was sent to Siberia. I don't think Queen Vashti ever enjoyed the frost bites of Siberian forest. I think what happened is she still lived in the palace, but he never joined her in their private matters. So she was not brought to official balls or things like that. Okay? Now, the thing is, sometime after that, and we do not really know when, people said, it's kind of, probably you're not in a good mood, man. You need another wife. You need to think about that seriously. Because everybody have wives, We do not look right with our neighbors, because Klingon, empire is coming, and they have, king and a wife, and then, everybody else are coming, and so on and so forth. Now, it is, when you read the book of Esther, it is very important to pay attention to chronology. The first chronology statement we have in chapter 1, verse 3, it says that these festivities began on the 3rd year of the king. Now, Queen Esther, we're not going to go through the whole story, but Queen Esther became a queen in the 7th year. So between the feast and the time when Queen Esther became the queen is about 4 years. Okay? We have those things in the Bible. We need to always pay it every time when you see something related to time. Please notice. It is important. It's always important. Okay? Now, she used to be a Jewish girl. Her name was Hadassah. Okay? Hadassah means mirth. Okay? Mirth has a star-like flowers. Okay? Kind of like a 5 pointy thingies. So flower, kind of like star. So when you translate it into Persian, her name became Esther. Therefore, it means star. If all of that would happen, for example, in the Roman Empire, her name would be what? Stella. Okay? Because Stella means the star. Oh, I forgot. I wanted to buy a Stella Artois, just to show you, because that's the star. So, the beer, Stella Artois. Never mind. Don't worry about that. So, her name is the star. Okay? I wrote a few things about the name in the very beginning, but we are not going to go to the handout right now. Now, the thing is, she became the queen. How did she become a queen? She became a queen because, unlike other girls, she was not simply obedient, but she was wise to look for an advice. An advice of one of the main eunuchs who was responsible for the whole harem. Okay? That guy knows what the king likes. Okay? So while others would ask for, I want this lipstick, I want this kind of fragrances, I want this kind of soap, I want this or that or those. Okay? She would say, what do you think king likes? And give me this, 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 and this. Okay? So instead of presenting herself, she presented someone that would be liked by a king. Okay? That's important. That's why, kind of going a little bit further, Esther is not a good book for feminist type people to read. She is a strong woman, but her strong side is to use those good wife, partner, supporter, queen for king, those kind of qualities. That's what makes her strong. Okay? Unlike stubborn Vashti, who ended up, as I just said, in the lands of Siberia. But, going back. So, now, she overheard the story, she let, or Mordecai overheard the story, he let Esther know, and by that, he saved the life of the king. And that's how the chapter 2 ends. Now, chapter 3 begins with a very interesting character. Haman, or after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the Agagite. Okay? And since we already have talked about the 1st and 2nd Samuel, you immediately can tell me who the Agagite should be. The Agagite is the descendant of King Agag that we find in the 1st Samuel chapter 15. That's the king that was fighting with Saul. Okay? Saul is a Benjamite. The father of Saul is Kish, or Kis. Okay? And that's important. Why it is important? Because if we go back a little bit in chapter 2, verse 5, we find out that the Mordecai was the son of Jair, or Yair, Simei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. So we have another descendant in the Benjamin lineage, the son of Kish, and we have a descendant of Agag. Okay? The thing is, just knowing that Haman is Agagite, we need to anticipate that it's not going to be a simple fight. It's going to be a mortal combat. Okay? They are going to go for the death of one or the other. Now, what happened with Haman? Somehow, king promoted him. We don't know why. We shouldn't care. King said that that's the guy that I want you to pay attention to and give the honors. So when he comes into the parliament building, all of you should raise your back muscles. Let's put it this way. You need to stand up. Okay? And the Mordecai says, no way. We guys from Judea don't do this kind of stuff. And everybody looked at him and said, like, are you nuts? He was, no, I'm not going to do that. Okay, the king said that Haman should be worthy of praise. Okay? The main objection about this is, therefore, Mordecai would worship him. Okay? That's why he didn't do that. I don't like that. Why? Let me tell you why. Who said that Haman should be honored? The king. If that respect or honoring is an act of worship, that means king, who is kind of the son of the deity, usually in the Near Eastern religion, is giving up his deity powers to someone else and asks the whole nobility to worship another guy. Not going to happen. It doesn't compute in my brain. Okay? So it was just an honor, but for some reason Mordecai says, I'm not going to do that. And he justifies it by the very simple fact that he is from Judea and we don't do that. Okay? Cool. So when Haman comes to the king and says, there is a nation in your kingdom who are all over the place, but they do not respect your rules, they do not respect your laws, is he really lying, or Haman has a reason for that? He has a reason. Because Mordecai just disobeyed the law. Right there. So where Haman makes the gravest mistake is he goes from the personal vengeance against one particular guy, and he transfers his anger from one guy to the whole nation. Okay? Now, the thing is that we need to pay attention to is in chapter 3, when everything begins, we have another mentioning of time. In chapter 3, verse 7, it says that it was 12th year of the king. So, in the beginning, we have a third year, 7th year, and this is 12th year. Okay? So we need to see how time flies through the book. And basically from 3:7 to the end of the book, we are in 12th year. So we are really fast approaching 3, 7, and then 12, and the rest of the book is 1 year.
Thank you.
Okay? Now, what is important to notice is when he is so obsessed with the killing of Mordecai, he decided to throw a lot Okay? And in Persian, and then it transferred into Hebrew, the lot, kind of like, you have a coin, you throw in a coin and it's whatever side it lands, that's the thing. So that kind of lot. Lot is poured. Okay? So that's why the celebration at the very end is when you cast it many times, it's many lots. So that's why it's called Purim. Okay? Because im is the ending, plural ending for the Hebrew words. But what is very interesting here is, so if you want to look into verse 7, in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, okay? That's what it is. So that's called lots. Before Haman, day after day. And they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is month of Adar. So let me explain what happened. In Nisan, it's one S. Yes, that's what I thought. Because it's not the car.
Oh, I was going to say.
Okay, so it's Nisan 13th. Okay, first of all, what happened in the history of the Jews on Nisan 14th? Guys, come on, Leviticus, we've just talked about this. Like only half a year ago. You should have remembered that. Okay,
Sure.
Nisan 14 is Passover.
Oh.
So guy knew about that and he said, okay, let me have my quarter and I will throw it and hopefully I will kill them on their Passover just to finally, commemorate this wonderful stuff and what Egyptians couldn't do, I will do it. Okay? So he had a quarter. Anybody has a coin, by the way, by any chance? No? Okay. So think about that. You have a quarter. You throw it okay, let's kill them on Nisan 14th. You throw a coin, it lands on whatever you want. Let's say no would be the eagle on the backside. Okay? Yes. Cool. I knew there was somebody who comes to Bible class prepared. So this is Lincoln, and that's the White House. Okay? So let's say the White House would be no, and Lincoln would be yes. So we threw it. Okay, Nisan 14th. Okay, White House. No. Nisan 15th. You threw it. White House. No. Nisan 16th. Threw it, and so on and so forth. So all of the times it was landing on the no side. And since we have no clue of the Hebrew calendar, the month Adar doesn't make any sense to us. So therefore, let me cue you in. Month Adar is the 12th month. So it took him about roughly 300 times. It landed no. And it came into the month of Adar. Okay? Something like 13th. The cool thing is, as one of my respected professors said, I probably would have got the message earlier. Okay? So it's a bad idea. But he still insisted. And sometimes when we insist with stupid stuff, God allows us to do it. Okay? So we see that stuff. With this idea, he comes to the king. And king signs the decree. Why? Because he was breathed in such a way that made sense. You do not want to have people who are spread all over your empire but disobey your laws. Okay? That's so obvious. But again, Haman jumped into conclusion his conclusion was based on the behavior of one particular guy. Okay? So if he would deal with Mordecai personally, that would be one story. But he decided to eliminate everybody. Okay? So he comes, tells the story, king believes it, and signs the decree. Now everybody, all the Jewish community got furious about that, got scared. And Mordecai comes to Esther. And he comes to Esther and says, you need to come to the king. But there was a law. Nobody can show up to the king unless you've been asked. Okay? So if you show up just because you want to do it, King might not be really happy about that. And so, to approach the king, she actually risks her life. But the thing is, what he tells her at the very, very end is, okay, in chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Then they told Mordecai what Esther has said, and she tells him that I have not been called for quite a while, actually. Then Mordecai, verse 13, chapter 4, told her to reply to Esther, do you think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all of other Jews? For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have to come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Okay? Most of the people, when they post those kind of things on Facebook or LinkedIn, I've seen them recently, actually, they see that as a positive message. The problem is, it is not. The thing is, if we'll step back into chapter 2, in chapter 2, it says that, so Mordecai, verse 7, he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, so she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely at look, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. And the thing is, oh boy, I lost the verse. It says that he told her to conceal her Jewish identity. Okay? Now think about that.
No.
Who knows that she is Jewish?
She does.
She does. Who else? Mordecai does. So when he tells her, do you think you're going to survive? While everybody else will perish. How does it sound to you now?
Cat and mouse.
He's going to rat her out. You know, you don't think that you're going to survive because I will make sure that everybody will know that you are a, Jewish girl too. Okay? Yeah, so that's a wonderful example of the blackmailing. So what happens is he kind of leads her to somewhat right decision, but instead of leading her with the gospel, with encouragement to take care of the people, he forces her by the threat. Okay? Now, at the very end of chapter 4, she asks to have a fast to support her and the prayer. Okay? She says that I will hold a fast for 3 days, not eating, not drinking. You guys please do the same. Okay? When you do not eat or drink, what happens to you?
You get sick.
No, you die. Okay? When you stop eating and drinking, after a while, if you do not drink or eat at all, you die. So the fast is a symbolic death. She, instead of waiting for the death that could have been in the month of Adar, she symbolically goes through death, hoping that God will resurrect her. Okay? So she goes through death and resurrection and asks that the people will accompany her too. They need to symbolically go through death and resurrection. Similar story we see in chapter 3 in Jonah, when the city of Nineveh, all of them, did not eat, did not drink. They put the sackcloth. What's a sackcloth? The sackcloth is a cloth that you use for buried bodies. Okay? And then you put ashes over your head. What does that mean? That symbolizes that you are below ground level. You are symbolically buried. Okay? So you go through symbolic death and hope that God will see that as a sign of your confession and contrition and will resurrect you. So what happens after that? After that, she prepares a banquet for the king, and he is happy to see her. Everything goes somewhat fine, and then that's the banquet number 1. And she saves that for a future, but in the midst of that, in the middle between banquet 1 and banquet 2, there is a night scene in chapter 6. At that night, king could not sleep. And he gave orders to bring the books, okay? So the books were brought where it was a recording that the Mordecai was the guy who saved his life. And that's very interesting. When he invites Haman and asks him for advice, again, what should be done to the guy who wanted to be honored by the king?
Killed him.
Who wants to be, the king wants to show that he is very thankful to the guy. Haman, being very blind by that time, I mean, not physically, but, spiritually, thinks that king talks about him. And says, yeah, put him on the king's horse. Give him the king's clothing. I mean, basically, he will look like a king, but he would not be the king. It's kind of, remember the story about Joseph. When Joseph tells the dreams of the Pharaoh, then it's Pharaoh who promotes him and sets him up. And it's the Pharaoh who says, the only thing will separate you and me is I still will be the Pharaoh, but you can have all the power. Okay? So basically, Pharaoh in the Joseph story kind of moved to a fun resort, playing golf, all of that kind of stuff, and Joseph was running the country. Here, not knowing the person king is talking about, Haman thought that's about him. And he's self-promoting. What a pleasant surprise he had when king said, yeah, go and do everything of that to Mordecai. I mean, just think about that. I'm sure the guy was not really pleasant. Now, what happens after that? After that, we have a second feast, and that's where king finds out from Esther, because she's kind of saddened with her face, what's going on. And she said, there is a guy who conspires against my people. She doesn't disclose that that's the Jewish people, just my people. And they want to be killed, and there is a whole conspiracy going on, and so on and so forth. And king is surprised, who wants to kill my wonderful most beloved queen? And then she points out to Haman. And king is distressed, and he goes outside. What do we have here? And the king arose in his wrath, and so it's 7:7. And from the wine drinking, and went into the palace garden. Okay, that's a euphemism. He went to bathroom. Okay, so he just needed, because he drank, quite a number of drinks, I guess. But Haman stayed and begged for his life from the queen Esther. And when the king comes back, he thinks that he is assaulting or making moves toward the queen. Yeah. And look at that. The last part of verse 8. I love it. Everybody who makes the movies should memorize this phrase and use it. Because sometimes, when people are killed, it's the blood splashes all over the screen, all of that kind of stuff. Now, as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. I mean, how beautiful picture is that? By the word, the guy can kill or execute somebody by his word. He wasn't enraged. He didn't shoot him. He didn't use his sword. He just said a single word.
That's it.
And they covered the face. I mean, this is so pictorial for me. This is really cool. And then they are going into their defense. He prepares. They prepare a defending strategy, and that's chapters 8 and 9. But in the 9, they are still attacked. Now think about that. The leader of the conspiracy died, and they know about that. And still, in the decree is Jews cannot make a preventive attack. They can defend themselves. So if they defended themselves, that means somebody attacked. Even though the leader of that conspiracy died, was executed, still some people were also crazy enough to attack those guys. Okay? So what happened is they were attacked, and we see 3 important verses in chapter 9, verse 10, 15, and 16. There is a reoccurring phrase, and the phrase is, they did not lay, they laid no hand on the plunder. They laid no hands on the plunder. They laid no hands on the plunder, and so on and so forth. Why it is important? It is important that they did not take the spoil to themselves. Because if we put it into that overall Bible chronology, as I told you, this is not the book about once upon a time in a faraway land. We know the land, and we also know the time. We need to put it into chronology with the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, we have a story that they began to build the temple, and they almost got it to completion, and there was a stop. Okay, there was nothing to support themselves financially. So what it looks like, they used that spoil to finish the reconstruction project. Okay, as we have quite often in the Bible. The beauties of the tabernacle in the wilderness were built from the spoils that they got from the people of Egypt. Okay? The temple partially was built from the spoils that David gathered from the wars with the Philistines. Okay? Same thing. That's what it is. We put it into chronology. We see how it fills out. And therefore, at the very end, they institute the Purim, the feast of their lots or defense. And at the very end, chapter 10, look at that. King Ahasuerus imposed taxes on the land and on the coast of the sea, and all of the acts of the power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are written in the book of Chronicles of the king of Media and Persia. For the Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. If he is a good guy from the very beginning, you do not need this phrase. You need this phrase only if you know and if you read carefully and understand that guy with his stupid behavior set up everybody, and that's why everybody were almost eliminated. Okay? So now, questions or comments?